Hey, you, welcome back to Secrets with Maeve, the space for the conversations we usually keep to ourselves. I'm Maeve. Today, we're talking about something I know so many of us struggle with in silence: why she pulls away the more she likes you. Let's get into it. She didn't become distant because she lost interest. She became distant because something inside her started to matter more than she expected. At first, everything felt natural. She was open, responsive, curious about you in a way that felt effortless. Conversations flowed, her energy was warm, and there was a subtle emotional availability that made you feel chosen. And then something shifted, not dramatically, not in a way you could clearly point to, but enough for you to feel it. Her replies became slower, her tone slightly more neutral. The emotional warmth that once felt so easy now felt measured. This is where most men misunderstand. You interpret distance as disinterest. You assume something went wrong. You begin replaying your actions, wondering if you said too much or not enough. But what's actually happening beneath the surface is far more complex. Because when a woman starts to like you more deeply, her emotional system doesn't always move closer. Sometimes it pulls back, not because she wants to lose you, but because she's beginning to feel something she can't fully control, and that changes everything. You're focusing on what she does instead of why she does it. The truth is, early attraction is easy for her. It's light. It's safe. There's no emotional risk attached to it. She can express interest freely because nothing is at stake yet. But the moment her feelings deepen, the dynamic shifts internally. Now there is something to lose. And when there is something to lose, the mind doesn't always move forward confidently. It becomes cautious, observant, protective. So the distance you feel isn't always her moving away from you. It's often her trying to understand what you mean to her. And more importantly, what she means to you, because now your behavior matters more than it did before. Every interaction carries weight. Every signal you send gets analyzed more deeply than you realize. This is where confusion begins. From your perspective, she's becoming inconsistent. From her perspective, she's becoming careful. And careful can look like distant if you don't understand what you're seeing. She might take longer to respond, not because she doesn't care, but because she doesn't want to appear too invested. She might hold back emotionally, not because she feels less, but because she feels more. And that intensity requires control. This is the silent shift most men fail to recognize. You expect consistency in behavior, but emotional depth doesn't create consistency. It creates awareness. And awareness changes how people express themselves. So when she becomes distant, it's not always a sign that you're losing her. Sometimes it's the moment she starts realizing you matter. And that realization is not always comfortable because now she has to protect something she didn't expect to feel. And that's where everything begins to change. What's actually happening beneath the surface is emotional conflict. Not confusion about you, but conflict within herself. Because liking someone casually is simple. It doesn't challenge her identity, her independence, or her emotional boundaries. But liking someone deeply, that introduces vulnerability. And vulnerability is not something the mind welcomes easily. This is where most men misunderstand. Again, you assume attraction should lead to closeness, but deep attraction often introduces hesitation because now she's not just experiencing you, she's experiencing herself differently. Her thoughts become more intentional, her reactions become more filtered, her emotional responses become more controlled. Not because she's playing games, but because she's trying to stay grounded. You have to understand something important. When a woman feels herself getting attached, her first instinct is not always to lean in. It's to pause, to observe, to assess whether what she's feeling is safe. Because emotional investment changes the stakes. Now she's asking questions she wasn't asking before. Does he really understand me? Is he consistent or just temporarily attentive? If I give more, will he value it or take it for granted? These questions don't come from insecurity alone. They come from experience, from patterns she's seen before, from emotional risks she's taken in the past. So instead of moving closer automatically, she creates space not to distance herself from you, but to regain clarity within herself. And this is where your perception becomes dangerous. Because when you sense her pulling back, your instinct might be to chase, to fix, to demand reassurance. But that reaction interrupts the very process she's going through. You're trying to close distance while she's trying to understand it. And that misalignment creates tension. You see withdrawal. She feels pressure. And pressure, especially during emotional uncertainty, pushes her further into distance. This is the paradox. The more she feels, the more careful she becomes. The more careful she becomes, the more distant she appears. And unless you understand this, you'll misread her behavior entirely. You'll think she's losing interest when in reality she's trying to protect it. Because once emotions deepen, they are no longer casual. They become meaningful. And meaningful emotions are not expressed recklessly. They are observed, controlled, and sometimes temporarily hidden. Not to deceive you, but to protect herself from moving too fast into something she's not fully sure about yet. So, her distance is not rejection, it's regulation. A quiet attempt to manage emotions that suddenly feel more significant than she expected. If you look closely, her behavior starts forming patterns, not random distance, but controlled shifts, moments where she engages deeply, followed by moments where she pulls back slightly. This is not inconsistency. This is emotional calibration. What's happening is subtle. She allows herself to feel close and then instinctively creates space to regain balance because emotional intensity, when left unchecked, can feel overwhelming. And most people don't want to feel overwhelmed by someone they're still figuring out. This is where most men get confused again. You see the pullback and assume something changed, but what's actually happening is she's managing how fast things are progressing internally. She might laugh with you, open up, show genuine connection, and then later become quieter, more reserved, slightly harder to read. That contrast is not a loss of interest. It's her mind stepping in after her emotions move too quickly. You're focusing on the drop in energy instead of understanding the reason behind it, because every time she feels herself getting emotionally closer, her awareness increases, and awareness brings caution. She may start analyzing your words more deeply, not because she doubts you, but because your words now carry emotional weight. She may delay responses, not because she's uninterested, but because she's thinking about how she wants to respond. There's intention now, there's care, and care slows things down. Another pattern you might notice is emotional restraint. She might avoid expressing too much too soon, not because she doesn't feel it, but because she doesn't want to lose control of the dynamic. Because once someone feels like they've invested more, they also feel more vulnerable, and vulnerability creates a perceived imbalance. So she subconsciously regulates that. She holds back slightly. She creates emotional space, not to disconnect, but to maintain equilibrium. And this is where your reaction determines everything. If you misinterpret her behavior as rejection, you'll respond with insecurity. If you understand it as emotional processing, you'll respond with stability. And stability is what allows her to feel safe moving forward. Because when she sees that you're not shaken by her distance, it tells her something important, that your presence is not dependent on constant reassurance, that your interest is steady, not reactive, and that steadiness reduces her need to pull back, because now she doesn't feel like she has to manage both her emotions and yours. She can simply experience the connection without pressure, without urgency, without fear of losing control. And that's when her distance slowly transforms back into closeness. Not forced, not rushed, but naturally, because she no longer feels the need to protect herself from the pace of her own emotions. The biggest mistake most men make in this situation is reacting to her distance instead of understanding it. You try to fix what isn't broken. You chase clarity when she's still processing it herself. You seek reassurance at the exact moment she's trying to stabilize her emotions. And this creates a silent imbalance because while she's trying to slow things down internally, your reaction speeds things up externally. This is where everything starts to collapse, not because she lost interest, but because the emotional rhythm between you became misaligned. This is where most men misunderstand deeply. You believe consistency in her behavior equals certainty in her feelings. But human emotions don't work like that, especially when they're growing. Growth introduces complexity, and complexity doesn't always look stable on the surface. You're focusing on her reduced communication, her subtle distance, her emotional restraint. Instead of recognizing that these are signs of deeper processing, and when you react impulsively, you interrupt that process. You might ask questions she's not ready to answer. You might demand clarity she hasn't fully found yet. And in doing so, you create pressure where there was only uncertainty, and pressure changes everything because now her distance is no longer just internal, it becomes external. She pulls back not to understand her feelings, but to escape the discomfort of being rushed. This is why emotional intelligence matters more than emotional intensity, because intensity reacts, intelligence observes. Instead of asking, why is she pulling away? A better question is, what is she trying to manage within herself? That shift in perspective changes your behavior. You stop chasing reassurance. You stop overanalyzing surface level changes, and you start responding with calm presence. You give her space without withdrawing your interest. You remain consistent without becoming overwhelming. And that balance is rare because most people either chase or detach. Very few know how to stay grounded in the middle. But that grounded energy is exactly what allows her to feel safe continuing, because now she doesn't feel like she has to protect herself from losing control or from being pulled too quickly into something deeper. She can move at a pace that feels natural to her. And when that happens, her distance is no longer necessary because the environment itself feels stable, and stability removes the need for emotional defense. In the end, her distance was never about losing interest. It was about managing it. What you interpreted as confusion was actually caution. What you saw as inconsistency was emotional regulation. And what felt like disconnection was often a silent attempt to stay in control of something that started to feel meaningful. This is the clarity most men never reach because they stay focused on behavior. They measure interest through frequency, responsiveness, and visible affection. But real understanding comes from looking deeper, from recognizing that emotions don't always express themselves in obvious ways. Sometimes the strongest feelings are the ones handled most carefully because they matter more. And when something matters more, people don't rush into it blindly. They slow down, they observe, they protect it, even if that protection looks like distance on the outside. So instead of reacting to her withdrawal, understand the context behind it. Instead of assuming you're losing her, recognize that she might be trying not to lose herself in the process. And when you hold that perspective, your behavior changes naturally. You become less reactive, more grounded, more aware of the emotional rhythm between you. And that awareness creates something powerful. Trust, not forced trust, but earned trust. The kind that builds quietly over time because she sees that you're not controlled by surface level shifts, that your presence remains steady even when things feel uncertain. And that steadiness is what allows her to eventually let go of the distance. Not all at once, but gradually, comfortably, without fear. Because now she's not just evaluating her feelings, she's experiencing yours. And what she sees is not pressure, not neediness, not confusion, but calm understanding. And that is rare, so rare that it changes how she connects with you entirely. Because in a world where most people react emotionally, you chose to understand emotionally. And that difference is what transforms distance into deeper connection. If this made you see things differently, subscribe, because understanding her mind changes.